Hi, my name is Chris Bland. I'm certified Atlassian professional. I'm one of the owners of BDQ, which is a solution partner based in the UK. Dom?
I'm Dom Bush. I'm also an Atlassian certified professional and also a co-founder of BDQ.
So then, this video, we're going to talk in a little bit more detail about some of the migration tooling we've developed and why we've done so, basically. So this is probably a follow-on to our other video where we went into a sort of a high level around how the migration process works. This time we'll go into a little bit more detail, and it's going to be a shorter video. So, I mean, what would you say some of the more thorny problems that we've dealt with?
Well, one of the really difficult ones is that when you migrate to cloud, the users must be unique in the sense that they must have a unique email address, and it is quite common that's not the case in most users, most customers' sort of databases. So it's uniquing the email addresses, or the other issue about it is some users in user directories don't even have an email address, but unfortunately on cloud that is one of the key identifiers for a user. So you have to make sure that that information is available.
Yeah, and that has various knock-on effects, doesn't it? Because actually users own things, they have access to things. So it's not just making them unique, it's making sure you've got the correct unique list, and then everything is transferred correctly, basically, and then those people have the right access in terms of permissions.
Absolutely, definitely, and it could be the case that also you have inactive or deleted users that own particular parts of the configuration of the product, in which case those things will not make it over into cloud using the Jira Cloud Migration Assistant or the Confluence Cloud Migration Assistant. It's really important to get this particular aspect correct.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Otherwise, it causes no end of trouble, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And one of the other things is, you know, in terms of when scale increases and we have larger, older instances, I think, yes, you get a lot more users, you know, potentially thousands of users. As you said, there can be multiple user directories involved, kind of duplications, all the issues we talked about, such as permissions not being right, or inactive users owning things which then won't migrate over with standard tooling. There's a bunch of problems. There's a series of other problems as well, isn't there? Such as dashboards, filters, custom fields, automations, and so forth. The bigger the scale, the more of them there are. And actually, JCMA actually basically doesn't deal with some of those things out of the box, at least.
Absolutely. So, for instance, the default functionality in JCMA is that it filters boards and dashboards do not migrate. There is a dark feature, which is sort of like a preview of functionality that's coming to the tool later that does move some of that information over. But yeah, there are issues around these things. And it really, as part of the migration process that we go through, is understanding all these different aspects and then creating a run book for the actual production migration over a period of a number of different iterations in order to address those issues and make sure that by the time you get to cloud, you have everything that you need to support your business requirements.
Yeah, no, exactly. And actually, based on some of our development experience and the way we prefer to develop, we've actually gone for a sort of a test first approach where possible to try and make this more scalable, haven't we? Some of the tooling you've developed and well, other people have developed as well, basically tries to make sure we can do as many pre-flight checks as possible and make sure we're a known case at all times.
Yeah, absolutely. So Atlassian provide a number of different tests, which they call the pre-flight, which are pieces of SQL that you can execute against the underlying repository under Jira to identify some of these issues. Now we have taken that outline, if you like, and added additional tests for various other different problems that we've found during previous customer migrations. But what we've done on top of that is put a harness that runs these tests in a sort of a unit test kind of way, and gives us an output in a report which we can look at and say, yes, we're seeing these particular problems. And it's very useful being able to just rerun that over and over and over again while we're developing this run book. It allows us to sort of use those software development kind of approaches, and we could really see those the number of problems decreasing until we get to a point where we feel that we've identified all those issues, resolved all those issues, and then we can be confident that when we move into production migration, that we're going to get the result that we all want.
Yeah, no, exactly. It saves an enormous amount of time, doesn't it? Basically, and much more reliable result, basically.
Absolutely, definitely.
So if we say, if you're going to do it yourself, definitely try and do it in a sort of test first type of way. Understand exactly what it should look like, and then actually you can take a sort of an approach where you do the migrations, and if there's problems, you'll be alerted to them as early as possible, and you can correct them as quickly as possible, and whilst keeping the situation known at all times. The other thing is we also have a sort of scalable approach to UAT as well, because some of these larger instances have thousands of users involved, and they've all got their own like workflows, projects, boards, and so on and so forth. So during that UAT process, we need to make sure that everyone has had a chance, or everyone relevant has had a chance to look at things, and then we need to better triage that in a manageable way. So that's and one of the other parts of our approach as well. So again, I suggest not using email for that, because that can be very difficult to get on top of.
Yeah, and there's always a possibility of missing things if you use email. So a more structured approach for capturing those comments coming back from UAT, moving through the process of addressing those issues is really important, because it just really helps make sure that the quality of what you end up with in cloud is the highest it can be.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we've talked elsewhere about the problems of the XML migration method wasn't, had some problems. JMA, or JMCA rather, is easier to use, isn't it, and does what it does better. Yeah. But it doesn't do filters, boards, and dashboards without you using the dark features.
Absolutely, yeah. So the tooling is very good, and it's improving all the time. But there are certain things that you have to be aware of as you go through the process and address those things.
Yeah, and actually one of the things is, if you chop things out of the instance, say you want to descope them out of projects you've got, that can cause problems, can't it, basically, as we know.
Yeah, so some customers take this migration to cloud as an opportunity to potentially take out stuff that's no longer required. So that might be projects that get deleted, perhaps they're archived, or that kind of thing. The issue comes with things like filters that rely on those particular projects being available. And then on top of that, obviously, you've got boards or dashboards. So by chopping out bits of data, potentially you affect not just that, it may have knock-on consequences. So some of the tooling that we've created helps with that process, helps with modifying the JQL, for example, for filters to take out missing content.
Well, I suppose you can sort of consider that, Jira, if you like, is a large database by which you can query with JQL. If we then start chopping bits out of the database, aka removing projects, then JQL that was querying those projects is going to break, basically, and that's what's in your filters.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the other, there's two ways of doing it. The other way is just take the whole thing through and then prune on the cloud. But still, if you start deleting tons of projects, and there are various tools to try and look at dependencies, but if you do that, then things are still going to stop working.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's no sort of easy way, is there?
No, regrettably, some of these things don't have very easy solutions, unfortunately.
No. But we've done some tooling around to try and assist with that, haven't we? Basically, which we'll talk about in a minute, which is your JQL runner and fixer. Now there's some other issues as well, isn't there? So we want to obviously we take a test first approach. We want to try and minimize the amount of fixes and retries. That's what everyone wants to do during migrations. Some people may know BDQ actually stands for business data quality, and we used to do data quality tooling for data migrations. We're very familiar with the problems of data migrations. In terms of, well, what approach would you say we've sort of done to try and minimize the amount of fixes and retries?
We wrote a number of different reports that pull the information from the source system and the target system, and allows us to do difference reports that say, over here we've got a certain number of filters, over here we've got a certain number of filters. Where are the differences between those two things? And that's quite useful when you're looking at things like permissions, that sort of thing. So yeah, understanding what you have, what you end up with in cloud is really very useful.
Yeah, it goes a long way before just how many issues have gone over, doesn't it? You basically, the tooling now, well, that we've developed basically lets you check all the actual key parts of Jira, such as filters, dashboards, and so on and so forth, to make sure it's actually gone across. Because as we know, sometimes these things don't go across, and they don't go across silently either. So you know, basically. There's also the JCL fixer, user fixer, because we know duplicate users is a no-no, which, as we said, causes no end of trouble. You've done a script.
Additionally, we've written some reports which take the log output that comes out of JCMA and CCMA, or actually just JCMA, and parse it into a slightly more digestible format. And that is very useful because the logs are the logs, but an actual report is slightly more readable than that.
Yeah, and that makes the whole thing a bit easier. There's also, script to monitor migration progress, which again, if it's occurring over time, just queries the REST API. That's a quite handy thing for people to do.
Absolutely, yeah. The user interface within JCMA is pretty good. However, one of the things that you might think it lacks really is a progress indication saying how far a particular plan has got. So yes, we've written a utility which simply polls the REST API and gives us a number, which shows us the exact percentage that we are halfway through, and that really is very useful when you're actually doing the migrations. Yeah.
And the other thing that's quite useful, isn't it, when you need to make a source system of Jira. So let's say we're going to cloud, and then day of cutover, we want to keep the old Jira system up, but we just want to make it read only. But also we may want to back that out easily.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've done basically a bulk archive permission scheme editor.
Yes, absolutely. So we have a script which will go through, look at the permission schemes that are currently in place, and it will edit those to take out write access for users. And as Chris was saying there, we can back that out very rapidly. It takes a few minutes at most to allow access back to the projects in the event that we need to roll back from our migration approach, migration effort, basically. So very useful.
Because there are some situations where you can't just literally have one read-only scheme and just apply it to everything and apply it back out.
No, I know that will be fine if everyone had the same access rates to all projects. However, in most circumstances, customers don't have that kind of very flat permissions approach. So taking what they currently have and just taking out all the right access is a much more safe way to do it, in the sense that you don't really want to potentially give someone read-only access to something that they didn't have read and write access to before, if you see what I mean.
No. Now I know you can't really share the comparison reports because obviously they're customer oriented, but actually, and yes, I know we can also test JQL in bulk, which is very, very helpful, isn't it? We can just pull it out, test all the statements, which basically is a way of telling us whether filters are going to actually work properly as part of our test first strategy. But I think you've got a small tool, haven't you, which is just a quick example
Sure, absolutely.
Of actually you can just throw JPort at the system.
So what I have on the screen here is a very simple Python utility. One can put in a piece of JQL and then just run it. What it's doing here is it's taking that JQL and executing it against the target system. So we can see here down the bottom, it tells us immediately where there are problems in this particular piece of JQL. We can see that these two projects, ABB and ABBA, don't exist. So very straightforwardly, I can go to this particular section, rerun it. Again, it highlights where the problem is, again, the ABBA project, and I can delete that again until I get to a point where the JQL has been corrected. Now, this is obviously a very straightforward piece of JQL, but more complicated things, it can also do that similar kind of approach. So we could take a list of filters from the source system, run it through this tool, correct them, and the output really is to get to a SQL script that we can execute against the source repository to update these filters and make them good and fit for the target cloud environment.
Yeah. So basically, if we're finding that actually data's being cut out and we've got a whole bunch of filters that don't work, after we've established they don't work, this is a quick way, isn't it? Basically, just trialing those JQuals, if you like, finding it and correcting.
Definitely.
So look, we thought we'd go into a little bit more detail about how things work. And it's an example of some of the tooling that we've had to do to give, so we can have a test first approach, so we can do reporting to compare all aspects of on-prem and on-server instances, which basically uses a mixture, doesn't it? I think of SQL and API calls, go through all the different aspects. Obviously, cloud is API only. And I hope you found some of that useful. If you've got a simple instance, it'll probably be fine to migrate. Something more complex, it might be worth speaking to a partner such as ourselves or others to see if it's worth getting some help to do it, because some of the more complex systems can be quite involved to migrate over in a seamless way, which does not impact on your IT department and their time. Anyway, many thanks for your time. I hope you enjoyed that, and see you on another video.
Thank you.